Hey everyone, it's Lisa here from Business in Heels, and I am so lucky today. I'm being joined by Dr. Jackie King, and I'm going to introduce her. So let's stay tuned. Jackie is a lawyer by training and has a PhD in public policy and EMBA in organisational leadership and strategy. She's had a long executive career dedicated to supporting purpose institutes in designing and implementing actionable strategies in leadership, governance, risk compliance, sustainability, operations, and service delivery. She's made her career change after going through a process outlined in her new book, The Ultimate Other. So, welcome, Jackie. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everybody.
So, tell us a little bit about the process of writing the book and some of the revelations you had whilst you were doing it.
Well, the book, which was published last September, called The Ultimate Other, over here, it's available on Amazon if anybody wants it.
Very cool.
Thank you. It was a 20-year really process, a very cathartic process of me trying to understand myself and my life, my role in how my life was panning out. And so it started off as a really raw journal, quite an angry journal, around the things in society, the systemic things, some of the personal things in my life that didn't pan out the way I had thought they would. And at some point, I decided that I wanted to try and turn it into something more than just the 800 odd pages of ranting and raving that it initially was, working around my children's extracurricular activities, taking my laptop with me and just, like letting out whatever was I needed to vent about on the keyboard while they were doing their ballet and their soccer and cricket and all the other things. And so at some point I decided that I wanted to turn it into a book, and I needed a framework that would give it some meaning and that would allow me to choose what to include and what to let go of, because there was just too much content there for a book. And in my work, in my strategic advisory work, I had come across the framework of human-centered design, and it very much resonated with me. I found it quite intuitive. And so I thought that I would apply my personal writings to this design thinking framework. And in fact, that did give me the framework that I needed and the order that I needed in the book. And that itself was also a cathartic process, because it changed the lens with which I curated the book to be ready for publication. And that included letting go of the things that weren't going to be included. So there was also like an energetic letting go, not just I won't include this. And also focusing on empathy. So for those of you who are familiar with human-centered design, there are 5 stages. And the first stage is having empathy for the people that you are trying to serve. And in this case, I was trying to serve myself. I was the person that I was trying to solve for. I was the problem to be solved. And so that allowed a different lens in how the book came together. And what I learnt actually through that process was around the theme of otherness. And so the book was originally about my divorce and about rebuilding my life after my divorce. And it was originally called A Woman Reconstructed, through design thinking and making something out of that process. But I realised once I had put it in that framework that actually otherness was the primary theme that I wanted to put out into the world, and that, and I changed the title. It took an extra year to get it out into the world once I made those choices. And so it was very much a personal cathartic process of me understanding myself in order to understand others better and my impact on them in the world.
And hence the title, The Ultimate Other, which is very cool.
Thank you.
So this led you to kind of change up the business that you had to this new iteration. So tell us a little bit about that as a business and how you actually help people.
So I had been working for a very long time in the tertiary sector and leading different functions within universities, so governance, strategy, risk, leadership development, all those kind of the invisible things that go on to make business work, accreditation, compliance, a whole range of things. And I had always had a consulting business that I dipped into and out of at various points in my life, particularly if I needed a bit more of a cash flow and would do small to medium-sized projects, particularly around impact. And through this process, I decided to back myself and to put myself out in the world with a design thinking and empathy-led offering. And so I took a gap year, which I'm now at the end of, and I developed a whole suite of programs around supporting people to have empathy for themselves in order to have empathy for others. And that's in the workplace, it's in the, in the private domains, and to put yourself in the centre of this problem-solving process to change the things you wanted to change, either for yourself, for those around you, in the workplace, in society. And so the ultimate goal really with this book is the thought leadership piece, is to be able to shift the dial on social cohesion through empathetic listening, through intentional dialogue, and all of that, in my view, starts with having empathy for yourself.
Well, and I imagine, as you were talking earlier about the divorce that you've been through and running around after kids, this is going to be very relevant to many women who struggle to have time or empathy for themselves because they're so busy focusing on everybody else but them.
Yes, absolutely. So, the return on investment for empathy shows that there's a greater magnified return when we start with women. And so while women aren't the primary focus of my offerings, they are the primary focus of the book as the thought piece. And in the group coaching, there's women-only group coaching and one-on-one offerings as well. And my view of this, and there have been a couple of instances where I've had people say to me, I'm too busy taking care of others to be able to do this for myself. Yeah. And that's true and that's fair. At different points in time, people have got different capabilities. And I think the best response I have to that is to think of it as putting on oxygen in an aeroplane. All the advice is to, put your mask on yourself before you help others, and fully acknowledge how hard it is to create the space. But once you do, it improves the quality of your life so much that it is worth the short-term pain of trying to fit the process in.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that many women don't do is don't ask for help, to create some of that space. And yet most of us would happily, step in for an hour or so to give people some, much needed time.
Some reflection time. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what's different about your actual services that you offer.
So there are a few things that are different in the services I offer. First being empathy-led. So empathy isn't traditionally a very corporate kind of buzzword. There are other words that are used, and which I sometimes come in and out of around alignment. And my kind of hypothesis is that, your unique skills, your unique otherness, the difference that you bring through your lived experience and your unique identities, plus empathy equals flow or alignment in leadership. And so, that is a starting point that is already quite different. The human-centered approach around having solutions that are co-designed around the real needs of people and the experiences of those people, the collaborative solutions to co-create sustainable change, particularly in the workplace. It's iterative and adaptable. So the growth mindset, not having failure, only learnings, and having the opportunity to change and to try something again in an innovation cycle is something that is also front and centre and quite unique, as well as the scalable impact. So, you can start with you, and then there's this whole ecosystem around the impact that can have and the flow on that can have. So all of those things I feel are quite unique in my offering, and they're the lenses that I bring across all of the services that I provide.
Yeah, awesome. So can you share with us a bit of an example of how that might work for somebody?
Sure. Well, I can start with a group example. So there was a group of 7 women actually who had come together to establish a hub in Australia, a national hub around some principles that they wanted to start embedding in business, in government, through the UN system. And they were at the start of their journey and they weren't quite sure how to come together as a cohesive group. And so they asked me to take them through this empathy-led design thinking process. And over a number of sessions, we talked about how they might have empathy for themselves and what it was that the change that they wanted to see in the system. So they had to agree on the question that they wanted to answer as a group, which is, that kind of facilitation is quite difficult because it requires vulnerability and openness to listening to others, empathetic. And so they started off knowing the change they wanted to see, but that doesn't necessarily equate into a innovation problem that they want to solve, or it's broader than strategy because it's about cohesion as well. It's not just how do we get from here to there, it's about how do we get ourselves in a position to be able to work together to ask that, how do we get from here to there. And so over a number of sessions we workshopped all of that. We started with themselves, their values, why they were there, what they wanted to achieve for themselves, what they were personally willing to contribute to make that happen. And it was once we heard each other's stories, storytelling is a really important part of what I offer, and it's a really, really important skill for executives particularly to be able to share. It allows them to be vulnerable. It allows them to connect at a human level with people at all different levels, including their peers, and to work together in that sense to then be able to come up with a common purpose and a common question to respond to, whether that's for systemic change, whether that's for team dynamics, whether it's for strategy. And now in the emerging world of compliance and psychosocial risks, they're really important questions to ask around changing culture, not just to have that space in risk compliance-based, because people won't buy in if it's only compliance-based. They'll see it as another administrative burden. So attaching it to purpose, attaching stories around it and opening up to each other around experiences and differences in those experiences is a really crucial element of what I do.
Which I can imagine as companies get bigger with more complex problems, it's actually really important to get that groundwork around cohesion before you even try and solve the problem. Otherwise, often all those hidden agendas undermine the team.
That's right. And the whole point of cohesion is inclusion. Actually, it's to allow people to share their experiences, to share their views, to be included in a way that gives them agency and allows them to, allows the reduction in those psychosocial risks that mean people stay quiet, that mean people get stressed, means that they need to leave work, it means they don't put up their hand, voluntary discretion at work especially. And so this process allows people to get to know each other through their otherness and through empathy. And
so,
all of the research shows that that kind of process has a return on investment in terms of engagement, in terms of retention, in terms of, quality of work, and then ultimately in terms of performance.
Yeah, you touched on flow earlier, and often you hear executives talking about segmenting themselves. So I'll be this person today, or I put on my work war face or whatever. How does your otherness break down some of these compartments?
That is an excellent question, actually. And so that is, in fact, what is unique around this process. So most books, the book's not original necessarily in applying design thinking to one's personal life. That has been done before. What is different is the holistic nature of the personal life that I'm trying to advocate for. So the question I had in my book wasn't how do I fix my relationships, or how do I fix my parenting, or how do I earn more money in my career. It was how do I bring my whole self through the narrative that I share with others. And so the questions that we ask are holistic in nature, and they will then have trickle-down effects to each of those domains, but that's what makes the approach unique. It's because the question is broader than how do I fix one part of my life. That might be what we settle on ultimately, but that's not what we start with. And what we start with is my question was, how do I align all of my narratives so that I can bring my full self into the world? And that is exactly the opposite of what you just said. It is bringing all of those identities, like really doing the work around who I am, what my values are, what are my triggers, what are my traumas, what are my biases, how did my childhood affect all of these? How do I bring them into my adult being? And then how do I bring them together? And how do I let go of the identities that don't serve me anymore? How do I bring in new elements of my identity because I'm not the person that I was? I feel like these stories and these conversations are enough to change how you feel about yourself or your place in the world. And so every time you have a meaningful conversation like that, there should be a part of you that is no longer in existence, and that conversation has filled a different part of who you are. And that's the kind of conversation that I really think is transformative individually, and then that's got that flow-on effect.
Which dovetails very well with, authenticity and leading with vulnerability and daring to lead, and a lot of things that are happening today, as opposed to the old thinking of I must be this super person that can do everything and be everywhere, which, and we all know is making lots of people unwell, because you can't be super at everything or live up to all these incredible expectations, hey?
It's true. So it is definitely a counter to burnout. And loneliness. There's no question about that. What's really interesting is that all of the conversations around the skills of the future in the workplace and requiring social and emotional intelligence. So empathy is a huge part of social and emotional intelligence, empathy for yourself and empathy for others. And the irony, of course, is that it might be in the top 5 skills of the future, but the reality is that people aren't looking after themselves in that regard, and they're not able to look after others as well as they might if they had empathy for themselves. And so the gap is actually, the literature says something called the empathy deficit, and that empathy deficit costs business money, a lot of money. And so in terms of understanding those impacts on the workplace in particular, this stuff is really important.
Yes, well, I think if you follow the Gallup poll, was it 76% of us are disengaged in the workplace? But today, just a little side plug, we just released the results for the Gender Equity Awards, and you can see in that many of the companies that are involved, or the individuals, empathy and thoughtfulness and treating people as individuals, not numbers, is a big part of what makes them stand out.
And the only way you can do that is to get to know them. It doesn't mean you don't have boundaries around your empathy for yourself or empathy for others. It doesn't mean you allow yourself to be used or manipulated or treated badly. And it means you take the time to understand yourself and to understand others.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, great conversation, Jackie. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with us. If you want to follow through and have a chat with Jackie, I've popped the URL up in the chat box. You can reach out to her there, or you can check out the Unique Otherness on Amazon. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.